stations and both TV satellite networks on Dish Network, channel 9415 Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on DirecTV, channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take us over 200 are. You can listen there at our website to the audio form of the headlines, as well as read the transcripts of the entire show. Our guests are Cleta Mitchell. She is a Republican attorney on the Board of Directors of the American Conservative Union and the National Board of Governors for the Republican National Lawyers Association, and Bertha Mitchell, Chief Organizer for Bertha Lewis, Chief Organizer for ACORN, Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. A lot of accusations here, Bertha Lewis.
Yes.
Well, why don't you take them on one by one?
And that's exactly what they are, allegations and accusations. And just because Ms. Mitchell and her organization says it's true, doesn't make it true. She should deal with facts and not lies and allegations. And she is right. ACORN has been attacked over and over and over again. In 2004, 2006, Matt Stewart versus ACORN in Florida, again, where we were accused of paying people by the card and encouraging illegal registrations. That case was actually shown that ACORN was totally exonerated from all of the allegations. And again, Ms. Mitchell and her compatriots, Republicans, took this man's case on. Let me just say once again, we are proud that we registered 1.3 million new voters. And we assist election officials in flagging and tagging problematic cards. We assist election officials in prosecuting anyone that would turn in false registrations. This accusation of dumping is just that. Once again, people need to check with those local election boards and see. We've been doing this for 18 months. We constantly, every 2 weeks, checks with them. So again,
this is the issue of profiling a voter. If you think they're Republican, this is the accusation of Cleta Mitchell.
I understand.
You throw out their card.
And again, let us consider the source of this accusation, and let us also consider the time at which this is coming. If Ms. Mitchell has someone that confesses to throwing out cards, I will join Ms. Mitchell in helping to prosecute that person. And Ms. Mitchell knows that she needs to stop making allegations. If, in fact, we were famous, as she says, and so notorious, then I think election officials ought to beef up their operations and assist us in stopping any potential fraud.
Cleta Mitchell, I have a question for you. I was listening to the Missouri Governor Blunt and the Mccain campaign manager Rick Davis on a conference call talking about ACORN and talking about the fact that if there are false names, voter registration fraud clearly means voter fraud. But when you have, for example, Mickey Mouse written, Mickey Mouse is not going to show up at the polls, and you have ACORN flagging the Mickey Mouse card, they're not allowed to throw it out. They have to hand it in. How, although that is wrong on the voter registration card, how is that voter fraud?
Well, you know, this is just the beginning. I mean, there's a whole continuum that we aren't even talking about, because the very same people who are bringing us these fraudulent registrations are the very identical people who object vociferously to voters having to produce an identification at the polls to demonstrate that they are indeed a real person living at a real address. These are the same people who oppose that. So what you have is a process that starts with fraudulent voter registrations, and then you have all of these same people, these activists on the left, your audience primarily, I'm sure, who object to the idea that a person should have to show identification of some kind when they show up to vote. And let me tell you, another huge issue is once you get these fraudulent names into the system, they're not all as blatant as Mickey Mouse. And I would also say that that one of the things election officials have done, and one of the things that the King County, Washington settlement required, was that ACORN had to turn in its names, its voter registrations, every 7 days, and they were not allowed to continue to pay people by the registration, and that every ACORN registration had to be denoted as an ACORN registration so that the election officials could know that that would be subjected to additional scrutiny. But one of the things that is a huge problem is that once you get these new fraudulent registrations, then people are voting by mail, and how are election officials supposed to ascertain if that's a fictitious or a real person?
Bertha Lewis.
Because they could create multiple names.
First of all, she's absolutely right. People do have to present identification. And again, historically, the folks that we've registered are low and moderate income people, majority people of color, and over half of them are under 30. Historically, these voters have been blocked. Rolls have been purged, which we're very concerned about. And so we want to make sure that people that are registered actually are allowed to vote. So again, let me just say—
What about that issue of voter ID, which has become a big issue around the country, and why groups feel that people shouldn't have to present, for example, a driver's license?
Because one of the things that has happened historically, from right after the Civil War, when blacks were thrust into the electorate, it used to be the Democrats that put up all kinds of barriers to people voting when they got to the polls. Now it seems to be the modus operandi of Republicans who want to challenge immigrants, who want to challenge brand new voters.
Illegals.
But again,
illegals.
What we want to be able to do is to make sure that citizens that are eligible to vote and are registered are allowed to vote, not purged from the rolls and not subjected to extreme measures in order to participate in democracy. And right now, in many states, and especially in these battleground states that we're talking about, people must present identification.
Cleta Mitchell, how many of these false voter registration cards have you counted? And how many of them were not flagged by ACORN?
Well, that is an impossible question to answer. I don't count voter registrations. That's not what I do. What I do is I work with organizations who believe very strongly that everyone who is eligible to vote should be registered and should vote, and their vote should be counted and not diluted by people who are fictitious, non-eligible. There is this whole effort. Yes, I mean, you heard just a little piece of it from Ms. Lewis just a second ago. The problem is these voter registration rolls are filled with fictitious names and erroneous addresses and people who don't exist, and then Ms. Lewis and ACORN do not want to have those people have to present identification at the polls to show I really am a real person. They don't want the polls to be, the rolls to be cleaned up to make certain that people who are on the rolls really are eligible to vote. I mean, it is an overwhelming burden on local election administration officials. And understand, we still have a system in this country where elections are administered by local units of government. And we have to do certain things to make sure the administrative process works properly. The civil rights groups, ACORN, the ACLU, they object to every single safeguard that has been put in place over the past decades to try and ensure the integrity of our election process. And it starts with faulty, fraudulent voter registrations, and it goes on a continuum from there. And they oppose everything to try to make sure that the election process is open, fair, and honest.
Bertha Lewis.
Again, Ms. Mitchell can say what she wants. It doesn't make it fact. We do agree that we
factual.
want it
we can
open.
support the facts.
She's not presented any facts. We do want it open. We do want people to be able to participate. And I hope that Ms. Mitchell and her Republican colleagues would join ACORN and other civil rights organizations in making sure that the local elected officials have the resources and the manpower and their regulations to be able to assist organizations and individuals like ACORN to actually register votes. We want those rolls clean. We want those rolls to be accurate. And we don't want people thrown off or purged. So join us in making sure that every person that's eligible to register is registered, and if they're registered, that they vote.
We agree with that, but what we don't believe in is allowing these rolls to be swelled so that you have in some jurisdictions more people on the voter rolls than there are eligible citizens in that jurisdiction to vote.
Let's make sure that the local governments take care of that, because they're getting taxpayer dollars. I think that that's their job, and I think we should assist them